I bought 5 copies of Wuthering Heights. I kid you not, 5 copies. 2 of them I bought brand new. 3 of them I bought used. Half of them have gorgeous covers, and I don't like a single one of them. Do you hear the wind? It's really gloomy outside today. We're on the cusp of dusk. Do you hear the wind? It's gray outside. Very windy. Trees are... looks like it's about to storm. Sun's about to set. The perfect time and day to be doing a review on Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, which I bought 5 copies of because I had been anticipating reading this book for years. So many people have told me that this book is fantastic, that it's amazing, that it's one of their favorite books. And so every time I saw a cover of Wuthering Heights, I would be like, okay, this is hot, I'll buy it. And then I would see a hotter cover and I'd be like, well, if it's in the running for one of my favorite books ever, I'd want a hot cover. I did not like it. I was tricked, bamboozled, misled by the reading community at large and everyone who's ever told me that they love Wuthering Heights. Being disappointed by it probably exacerbates whatever dislike I feel toward it. But that being said, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't like it. I wouldn't recommend it. That's why we're here today to do a review of Wuthering Heights. It's overrated. We won't prevaricate. I wanted to say fornicate. We're gonna get right into the review with a thesis statement for the sake of anyone who doesn't want to hear me blasphemize Wuthering Heights for what will probably end up being an obscene amount of time. Instead, you can get the point of the video, type a hate comment out, and get back to your life. I did an outline of this. I tried filming this video once and I was all over the place, so I did like a bulleted outline of what we're talking about. Anyway, here's the thesis. Failing to achieve its intended tragic realism, what would otherwise solely be humorless melodrama is instead buoyed by a handful of standout passages to quaint relic. In Gen Z parlance, Wuthering Heights is mid. Just Google some slay quotes and move on. As for the review, I tried to divide it into 2 distinct categories. Flaws of Wuthering Heights and then what I didn't enjoy. And of course they end up bleeding together because, like a flaw, you usually don't enjoy. Unless you enjoy the book overall, then you tend to sweep flaws under the rug, which I do all the time if I like a book, but I didn't like this book. But I didn't want to make a video about not liking it and being like, I just didn't like it. So I have flaws. There are flaws to Wuthering Heights, and I didn't enjoy it. We're gonna start with the flaws. There are 2 main ones. The first being that it's way too unintentionally melodramatic. When it's intended to be a tragic portrayal of reality and love and familial dynamics and stuff like that. The primary source of the melodrama to me was the interplay between the current and past timelines in Wuthering Heights. There are 2 timelines. You have the present story that is told by a narrator who has no relation to the characters of Wuthering Heights other than that he's staying in a building that's part of the estate, and he has the maid recounting the story of the Wuthering Heights family drama with the Heathcliff everyone knows, loves, and hates. But the narrator's staying on his estate, and he has the maid who grew up / raised characters from the family drama, and she retells him the family drama, thus establishing the second timeline, which is the retelling by the maid to the narrator. So there are 2 timelines. Near the end of the novel, there's an unexpected inflection point between the past recounting of the Wuthering Heights drama and present unfolding, which was, did I say it was unexpected? I thought it was clever, but I still thought the transition between retelling and present was clunky, technically clunky, and melodramatic. Like it would be like, I have some examples. I actually have some examples written down. Oh, also not realizing that the story would have like a second chapter, that it would start unfolding in the present, gave the Wuthering Heights saga a very doomed finality feel. Because you think that the maid's just telling you about past events, and then the past events actually progress once you reach that inflection point. Okay, here are some examples of what I thought was melodramatic about the interplay between the past and present timeline. The first quote is from the start of chapter 4. It abruptly kicks off the retelling of the Wuthering Heights saga. Quote, "What vain weathercocks we are! I, who had determined to hold myself independent of all social intercourse, and thank my stars that at length I had lighted on a spot where it was next to impracticable, I, weak wretch, after maintaining till dusk a struggle with low spirits and solitude, was finally compelled to strike my colors, and, under pretense of gaining information concerning the necessities of my establishment, I desired Mrs. Dean, the maid, they're the two main characters of this timeline that we were talking about. I desired Mrs. Dean, when she brought in supper, to sit down while I ate it, hoping sincerely she would prove to be a regular gossip." I don't like the tone. It's melodramatic. What vain weathercocks we are. And then it's very clunky. It's like Bronte's just using this narrator as a means of recounting the past. Let's do another example. This one is a lot more apparent. Page 66, not that it really means anything, but you might be able to gauge where in the novel the quotes I talk about are. There are so many editions of Wuthering Heights, but mine is 248 pages, so if you feel like doing the fraction and then, to find where in your book it is, feel free. Page 66, chapter 10. Quote, "I'm too weak to read, yet I feel as if I could enjoy something interesting. Why not have up Mrs. Dean to finish her tale? It's too abrupt. It's too silly. It's too silly." All of the melodrama in this book, which we'll get to a lot more, this is just the most concrete-ish melodrama, is the weaving in between. It's like, why don't I just call up the maid and, have her tell some story? I'm tired. And then there's another one, which I don't think I wrote down. It's somewhere. We'll get to it in a bit. But my issue with the melodrama in large part is that it clashes too much with the grave monotone of the rest of the book. It's supposed to be a tragedy. That's what's intended. But instead you have these weird melodramatic quirks, especially in the transitions between timelines. As a character, the narrator is almost a bit too Deus Ex Machina-y. It's just back to the story, and then Bronte can just cut up the story into the bits she wants to recount, and pull it forward by not dragging on too much, or whatever. Oh, also, as the characters are all apes. They're all apes. The maid that we've been talking about is a buffoon. She is a caricature, she's ineffectual, stupid. She's your classic, wry but caring maid who's melodramatic and dumb, and I didn't love her. Again, clashes with the intended tragic realism. Like I said, the narrator is almost inessential to the story for all but the structure. He himself is also a farce, the quote, "Oh, woe is me, I'm such a gossip." Melodramatic. He also runs out into a snowstorm and almost dies out of pride or something. Something like that in the beginning. I was cool. No big deal. Cool. Seeing the Heathcliff drama unfold between two of the most melodramatic, they're all melodramatic. They're all silly apes, like I said. But between the two most flat caricatures in a dim lit sitting room lit by candlelight or whatever, gives the story, instead of the intended realism, a comic dark fairy tale hue. Here's a good example of their interaction. So far I've only read quotes of the narrator being "Oh, why don't I call so-and-so up to tell me the story?" And then the story, of course, progresses. But here's a page-long quote. I was going to do a portion of it, but then I was if we're doing a takedown of Wuthering Heights, let's do a takedown of Wuthering Heights. This is a scene between the maid and the narrator, and I think it's very typical of their relations. So I'm going to read all of it. It's a paragraph, and then it's a page on pages 44 and 45. Here's the quote. "But Mr. Lockwood, I forget these tales cannot divert you. I'm annoyed how I should dream of chattering on at such a rate, and your gruel cold, and your nodding for bed. I could have told Heathcliff's history, all that you need to hear in half a dozen words." Thus interrupting herself, the housekeeper rose and proceeded to lay aside her sewing, but I felt incapable of moving from the hearth, and I was very far from nodding. "Sit still, Mrs. Dean," I cried. "Do sit still, another half hour. You've done just right to tell the story leisurely. That is the method I like, and you must finish in the same style. I am interested in every character you have mentioned. More or less." And then here's the page-long quote. I'll read fast, I promise. Quote, "Well, you must allow me to leap over some 3 years during that space. Mrs. Earnshaw—" No, I'll allow nothing of the sort. Are you acquainted with the mood of mind in which, if you were seated alone and the cat licking its kitten on the rug before you, you should watch the operation so intently that Puss's neglect of one ear would put you seriously out of temper? A terribly lazy mood, I should say. On the contrary, a tiresomely active one. It is mine at present, and therefore continue minutely. I perceive that people in these regions acquire over people in towns the value that a spider in a dungeon does over a spider in a cottage, to their various occupants. And yet the deepened attraction is not entirely owing to the situation of the looker-on. They do live more in earnest, more in themselves, and less in surface change and frivolous external things. I could fancy a love for life here almost possible, and I was a fixed unbeliever in any love of a year's standing. One state resembles setting a hungry man down on a single dish on which he may concentrate his entire appetite and do it justice. The other, introducing him to a table laid out by French cooks, he can perhaps extract as much enjoyment from the whole, but each part is a mere atom in his regard and remembrance. Oh! Here we are the same as anywhere else. When you get to know us, observed Mrs. Dean, somewhat puzzled by my speech. Excuse me, I responded. You, my good friend, are a striking evidence against that assertion. Excepting a few provincialisms of slight consequence, you have no marks of the manner which I am habituated to consider as peculiar to your class. I am sure you have thought a great deal more than the generality of servants think. You have been compelled to cultivate your reflective faculties for want of occasions for frittering your life away in silly trifles. Mrs. Dean laughed. I certainly esteem myself a steady, reasonable kind of body, she said. Not exactly from living among the hills and seeing one set of faces and one series of actions from years in to years in, but I have undergone sharp discipline which has taught me wisdom. And then, I have read more than you would fancy, Mr. Lockwood. You could not open a book in this library that I have not looked into, and got something out of also. Unless it be that range of Greek and Latin, and that of French. And those I know one from another. It is as much as you can expect of a poor man's daughter. However, if I am to follow my story in true gossip's fashion, I had better go on, and instead of leaping 3 years, I will be content to pass to the next summer, the summer of 1778. That is nearly 23 years ago. It's raining now. Drizzling. The characters are probably intentionally portrayed as provincial and pompous, respectively, but I still don't care, because it was annoying to read, and I don't like either of the characters. Also, the aforementioned tone clash. Either write a comedy of manners, or write a tragic reality. I don't want a 2-for-1. Another flaw / personal dislike is that everything feels so fake. Wuthering Heights feels like an extremely well-executed parody of a classic. The further irony of Wuthering Heights being so melodramatic is, which we're not even done discoursing on. The melodrama just kind of seeps into every point of this review. But the further irony of it being so melodramatic is that the book is not at all humorous. And the prank is that life is not a tragedy. Life is a comedy. You can't do tragedy without humor. That's what Wuthering Heights is. There's no humor in this. Even Anna Karenina, even Tolstoy is funny. You might not catch it because he's so straight-faced when he's funny, but he is funny. Emily Bronte is not funny. The only actually funny bits of Wuthering Heights were unintentional and happened when Bronte was in complete earnest about something ridiculous. Here's my favorite example. Page 71. About the middle of the night, I was awakened from my first nap by Mrs. Linton gliding into my chamber, taking a seat on my bedside, and pulling me by the hair to rouse me. On the note of the novel's tone, this is a bit kind of out of place, doesn't matter. But the pathos of Wuthering Heights hinges on an adult abusing children, which is very depressing, unavoidably depressing, but it feels very cheap because of implausible or unexplained motives, which leads us to the second major flaw of Wuthering Heights, and that is that the characters are not realistic. All the tragedy in Wuthering Heights results from a forced naivete. For example, Isabella not trusting her family, Kathy playing into Heathcliff's trap to have Linton marry her, etc., etc. And I struggled for a while with whether this was a flaw of the book, is a flaw of the book, or if I'm just not really like a great judge of humanity, if I'm not well versed in the apery that is humanity. But regardless of whether the characters and their actions seem realistic, they're not explained in a manner that makes them feel inevitable. E.g. Tolstoy, which is the whole point of a realistic novel like Wuthering Heights, or Anna Karenina, but Anna Karenina pulls it the hell off. Tolstoy is the king of realism. If you're looking for something realistic and tragic, pick up Anna Karenina, not Wuthering Heights. Like I said, the maid and narrator are two like silly cardboard caricatures, but the biggest farce of Wuthering Heights is Heathcliff, who gives way more farce than he does big baddie villain. Throughout the book, since I think nearly his introduction as a character, Heathcliff acts like an absolute ape. Like a literal crazed lunatic, mean, unhinged. Like everyone talks about Heathcliff being one of the biggest villains in all of literature, but like I said, he's more of a farce. But I get it, he does awful things. They're just comic in light of them being so silly. I don't buy it. Like we're supposed to attribute him being this awful guy because of people bullying him a little when he was growing up, or because he didn't get the broad he wanted. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Some fun examples of Heathcliff acting like an absolute ape, melodramatic, silly. He hangs his wife's own cat on a fence. He abuses his own kid. He hits his niece in the face. He holds kids hostage. Also, the Deus Ex Machina spiral revelation, letting go of revenge. His thirst for revenge at the end of the book, I was like, okay. He also said he almost did execution on himself. Heathcliff is a depressed baddie just like you. I'm going to read you the paragraph that quote that doing execution on myself comes from, because it's very representative of Heathcliff's melodramatic character as a whole. We should have a counter for every time I say melodramatic. Sorry. Oh, of course, on the same page as the hair-pulling quote, page 71. This was an action-packed page that had me giggling. Oh, for a while Heathcliff and his lover Catherine are separated after Catherine marries another man, and that's kind of Heathcliff's whole motivating rage for the entire novel, but they eventually reunite. Oh my god, I need to put in somewhere in the beginning of this that this will have spoilers. Did I say this will have spoilers? I mean, if you're clicking on a rant review of Wuthering Heights, you better expect a few spoilers. But they reunite. And she's like, to be absent and silent for 3 years and never to think of me. And then Heathcliff goes, a little more than you've thought of me. I heard of your marriage, Kathy, not long since, and while waiting in the yard below, I meditated this plan. Just have one glimpse of your face, a stare of surprise perhaps, and pretended pleasure. Afterwards, settle my score with Hindley, and then prevent the law by doing execution on myself. Your welcome has put these ideas out of my mind, but beware of meeting me with another aspect next time. What a moody brat. And he's like a full-ass, grown-ass adult at this point. Like, he has a kid, I'm pretty sure. He has a whole-ass broad of a wife who I don't remember if has run away at this point yet, because he's awful. He's awful. A random list of other irrational melodramatic character examples include but are not limited to Isabella Linton not breaking off her engagement to Heathcliff after realizing he's a monster, Catherine Earnshaw carrying a torch for Heathcliff forever and then dying of lovesickness or something. The whole Heathcliff Catherine love affair that's central to the story is comical. It's like grown-ass adults acting like damn fools. For what? And for what? Especially Catherine, who hangs on to Heathcliff after she marries a man, has a daughter, and then just neglects her household and daughter. Like, get a grip. Not believable. Like, even in Anna Karenina, when she was out being a little whore, being a little slutty, getting her rocks off, she still loved her son, even though she hated the man who fathered that son. Like, Anna Karenina, I say this all the time, is my cultural, like, touchstone for every theme it considers or whatever. I don't buy it in Wuthering Heights, though. It's just also comical and, like, don't buy it. Don't buy it. Like, this woman died over a hunchback, chameleon-eyed gorilla of a man. Continuing with the irrational character examples, Kathy Linton loving her imbecile brat of a cousin for no other reason than he's hot or something. Apart from the cringe of their relationship, I'm just not here for the cousin love. Another example, Kathy Linton courting a fool, lying, gaslighting her maid, and then slapping her. Joseph the servant farmhand's barely comprehensible manner of talking, like, not exaggerating. I had to be like, the fuck is he saying? And at points I was like, you know, some things you just gotta let go, and I moved on with the book. And the last fun melodramatic tidbit that will be included in this review, random, whatever, is old Mr. Earnshaw checking Heathcliff's door every night in hopes of it being open so that Earnshaw can kill him. I'm going to read you the quote. It's on page 103. "Look here," he replied, pulling from his waistcoat a curiously constructed pistol having a double-edged spring knife attached to the barrel. "That's a great tempter to a desperate man, is it not? I cannot resist going up with this every night and trying his door. If once I find it open, he's done for!" We're transitioning into the personal. What I have as a heading, personal, in all caps. We're going back to the characters, but a different gripe. It's that I hated all of them. That I did not care about a single one of them. I thought all of them were annoying, aggravating, stupid. And I don't remember who said this. Maybe it was me. Maybe I'm quoting myself. But good stories rely on a hateable villain. There are no hateable villains in here. There are just, like, comical apes. And there's nobody to root for. So it's just like you're left with a cast of annoying-ass characters. Game of Thrones, good example of hateable characters you love to hate. You don't love to hate any of these. You just, like, watch Heathcliff hanging pets, hitting children, and you're like, Oh, I feel like I have to mention this at some point in the review, so we're shoehorning it in here. The story has a happy ending. We talked about the inflection point when it goes from past to present. Well, that being unexpected, it becomes happy, which was unexpected. There's a happily ever after ending, and I was so over it, I was just like, okay. Also, the women, no, I can't even say especially, because everyone was a fool, but especially. I think the one redeeming character was Hareton, that his name? Hareton was sweet, but Hareton ends up with Kathy, his love. And that's sweet, but I really didn't care by that point. I was like, I'm so over these characters. Second personal flaw of this book is that it was boring. It was boring. I didn't enjoy the reading process of this at all. The writing is pretty good. albeit melodramatic, but I still don't care. I still didn't care. It's not my type. I don't love antiquated English. In fact, I do not like it. Even in books that I like, that were written in whatever the 1800s, it's usually a hump I have to get over, rather than something that enhances my experience with the book. I haven't ever talked about this, but no. The third thing I didn't like, the setting. It was just dirt and mud and farms. I don't like farms. I don't like a farm setting. I don't like mud. That's a lie. I think mud's cool, but not as a setting. Not as a setting. Hated the setting. Bleak. Boring. Boo farms. Oh, and the last reason, my last personal gripe with Wuthering Heights, is that it's considered a classic. It's considered not only a classic, but one of the best books ever written, and pretty much essential reading to everyone. And I hate that. I think that if you're not a reader, if you don't read books frequently, Wuthering Heights is so useless. It's like there are so many books out there. Maybe for the time it was written, I can't think of very many women who were like writing prolific books. Someone recently commented, Listen, I'm not beefing with my fans, but someone recently commented, they were like, "You're cool, so I know this won't bother you, but actually most great classics are written by old white men." And I was like, no, duh, you dipshit. In response to me saying in a video that something reeked of self-important, unhumorous old white man. I was using the epithet version. Obviously, old white men have contributed a lot to the canon. What was the point? Anyway, there's so many good books in the past. When was this written? Probably like early 1800s. I'm trying to get better about knowing when books were written. Don't know. Do not know. Emily Bronte lived from 1818 to 1848. So I would guess the book was written sometime in between those two dates. But that's been more than 200 years. Maybe. No, less than 200. Unless she wrote it when she was 3, who's to say? But there's a lot of good writing out there that I would recommend before Wuthering Heights. Then do it. Okay, I will. I actually have a list of books I recommend you read before Wuthering Heights that consider similar themes, give similar energy, per se, to Wuthering Heights. Where Angels Fear to Tread, E.M. Forster. Howard's Inn, E.M. Forster. Forster's a good example of antiquated English that I don't mind, because his books are really, really great. Valley of the Dolls by Jacqueline Suzanne. The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins, another classic. I Capture the Castle, for much better female characters, especially young ones. All of the women in here, I mean, even if they were grown, acted like fools, but especially the teenagers. Like, a direct contrast that comes to mind for me is Cassandra, the narrator of I Capture the Castle, with, I think it was Kathy, the younger Kathy. Everyone shares a name or something in this book. It's complicated. I had to Google a family tree when I was doing this review, but between Cassandra of I Capture the Castle and Kathy, the young Kathy Linton, who acted like a complete ape when she was a teenager, and I was like, I don't buy it. So also, I don't know where else to talk about this, so I wanted to let you know that Heathcliff and the whole saga reminded me a lot of a series of unfortunate events. I don't know what to do with that information. I don't know what I want you to do with that information, but I had to get it off my chest. I look at picking up a book often in terms of opportunity cost, because when I'm like, I don't like a book, like, it's very rare that a book has no redeeming qualities to it. The case is just that, like, I wouldn't spend time on that over spending time with something else. I would not recommend Wuthering Heights to anyone except someone who is very, very well read and just wants to, like, knock it off their hit list. I just wouldn't recommend this book. Ooh. We're wrapping up the video with parts of Wuthering Heights. I said it was buoyed. The thesis was that it was buoyed by a handful of standout passages, and it is, and it was, and it is. But of course, a handful of standout passages does not warrant reading an entire book. But some of the passages were really good, and here are about 8 quotes. We'll speed through them. Don't say, "I'm not fair." Now, their commenter on a takedown of Dracula I have up on the channel, someone was like, awful review, awful review. You didn't talk about anything, any redeeming qualities. And I was like, well, I actually did. I hate to break the news, but I did. Hated Dracula. There's a video on it. Go watch it. I don't talk about any aspects of the book that I liked. It's a very biased review. Because I didn't enjoy it, I let you guys know that I didn't enjoy it and am therefore biased. But I'm going to switch it up and tell you the parts of Wuthering Heights that I really liked. We're just going to do a quick run through. Page 29, quote, "He was and is yet most likely the wearisomest self-righteous Pharisee that ever ransacked a Bible to rake the promises to himself and fling the curses on his neighbors." 44, quote, "It is for God to punish wicked people. We should learn to forgive. No, God won't have the satisfaction that I shall." 60, quote, "My love for Linton is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it, I'm well aware, as winter changes the trees. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Nellie, I am Heathcliff. He's always, always in my mind, not as a pleasure any more than I am always a pleasure to myself, but as my being." Eats. It's giving Call Me By Your Name. I really like give the idea of you are someone else, and I agree. You the most intimate. I'm not explaining it. 67, quote, "Well, we must be for ourselves in the long run. The mild and generous are only more justly selfish than the domineering." Ayn Rand haters, are you taking notes? 75, quote, "You are an impertinent little monkey." 127, quote, "He's not a human being, and he has no claim on my charity. I gave him my heart, and he took and pinched it to death, and flung it back to me. People feel with their hearts, Ellen, and since he has destroyed mine, I have not power to feel for him." 133. This is a paragraph, but it's the best. It's the best quote, so buckle up. Quote, "Fie, miss," I interrupted. "One might suppose you had never opened a Bible in your life. If God afflicts your enemies, surely that ought to suffice you. It is both mean and presumptuous to add your torture to his. In general, I'll allow that it would be, Ellen," she continued, "but what misery laid on Heathcliff would content me, unless I have a hand in it. I'd rather he suffered less, if I might cause his sufferings, and he might know that I was the cause. Oh, I owe him so much. On only one condition can I hope to forgive him. It is, if I may take an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, for every wrench of agony return a wrench, reduce him to my level. And as he was the first to injure, make him the first to implore pardon. And then, why then, Ellen, I might show you some generosity." Eats. It eats. Really good quotes. But the last and best quote to come out of Wuthering Heights is page 80, quote, "Who's your master?" Devil Daddy.